May 15, 1914, New York City. A man approached the Rockefeller mansion at 4 West 54th Street, early morning. The street was quiet. He carried a suitcase. Inside were explosives, dynamite wrapped in newspaper, a timer set to detonate in minutes. He placed the suitcase on the front steps. Then he walked away. The bomb went off at 9 a.m. The explosion tore through the limestone facade. Windows shattered across 3 floors. Smoke poured into the street. Police arrived within minutes. They found blood on the pavement. 2 bodies. The bomber had been caught in his own blast. He died instantly. A second man nearby was hit by shrapnel. He bled out before help could reach him. The target was clear. John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in America, the most hated man in America. This was not the first attack. This would not be the last. 3 estates across 2 states, a family under siege for 30 years. The Rockefeller properties survived what no other Gilded Age fortune could: total national hatred. John D. Rockefeller was born in 1839 in Richford, New York. His family was not wealthy. His father was a con man who sold fake medicine. He traveled from town to town selling bottles of liquid that supposedly cured cancer. It did not cure anything. William Rockefeller was a bigamist. He had 2 families in different states. Neither knew about the other. He abandoned both regularly. Young John rarely saw his father for months at a time. His mother, Eliza Davison Rockefeller, held the family together. She was deeply religious, a Baptist who believed in hard work and divine providence. She taught her children that success came through discipline and faith. John absorbed both influences, the ruthlessness of his father, the piety of his mother. He would need both to build what came next. The family moved frequently from New York to Ohio, from town to town as William's schemes collapsed or his lies caught up to him. They were poor, not destitute but struggling. There was never enough money. John learned early that poverty meant vulnerability, that wealth meant security. He vowed he would be rich. At 16, Rockefeller got his first job, a bookkeeper at a Cleveland shipping firm. He earned 50 cents per day, 6 days per week. That was $3 weekly, about $150 annually. He saved every penny he could. He lived at home. He walked to work. He brought lunch. He spent almost nothing. He gave 10% to his Baptist church. Even then, even earning almost nothing, he tithed. It was a habit he never broke. Rockefeller was good with numbers, very good. He could calculate faster than most people. He spotted errors in ledgers instantly. He understood financial patterns. His employers noticed. Within a year, they raised his pay. By age 20, he was earning over $500 annually, enough to live independently. But he still saved, still lived simply, still gave to his church. In 1859, oil had been discovered in Pennsylvania. A man named Edwin Drake drilled a well near Titusville. He hit oil at 69 feet. The first commercial oil well in America. Black liquid that could be refined into kerosene for lamps. It was replacing whale oil. Whale oil was expensive, scarce. Kerosene could be mass-produced. The demand was massive. Thousands of men rushed to Pennsylvania to drill. Oil towns sprang up overnight. Fortunes were made in weeks and lost just as fast. Rockefeller watched. He did not rush to Pennsylvania. He stayed in Cleveland. He studied the oil business from a distance. What he saw was chaos. Wells came up dry, or they produced too much. When production surged, supply flooded the market. Prices crashed from $5 per barrel to 10 cents. Drillers who were rich one month were broke the next. It was gambling, not business. Rockefeller hated gambling. He wanted certainty, predictable returns, controllable variables. He understood something crucial that others missed. The money was not in drilling. The money was in refining and distribution. Oil had to be refined to be useful. Crude oil was worthless. It had to be processed into kerosene. Whoever controlled refining controlled the industry. And Rockefeller intended to control refining. In 1863, Rockefeller invested in his first refinery. He was 24 years old. He partnered with Samuel Andrews, a chemist who understood the refining process. They built a facility in Cleveland, close to railroads and shipping routes. Cleveland was perfect, far enough from the Pennsylvania oil fields to avoid the chaos. Close enough to receive crude oil cheaply, their refinery was efficient. Andrews was a skilled chemist. He extracted more kerosene per barrel than competitors. Less waste, higher profits. The business grew quickly. By 1865, Rockefeller bought out his other partners. He and Andrews owned the entire operation. They called it Rockefeller and Andrews. It was the foundation of what would become Standard Oil. In 1870, Rockefeller reorganized. He created the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, capital of $1 million. That was enormous for 1870. Most businesses operated with a few $1,000s. Rockefeller had convinced investors that oil refining would be hugely profitable. He was right. The company bought crude oil from drillers in Pennsylvania. It refined the crude into kerosene at their Cleveland facilities. It sold kerosene to distributors nationwide. The business model was simple: buy low, refine efficiently, sell everywhere. But execution required ruthlessness, and Rockefeller was very ruthless. His first major move was negotiating secret deals with railroad companies. Railroads moved oil from Pennsylvania to Cleveland. They moved kerosene from Cleveland to markets. Shipping costs were a huge expense. Whoever got the lowest rates had an advantage. Rockefeller approached the railroads with a proposition. Standard Oil would ship all its oil on their lines exclusively, thousands of barrels daily, guaranteed business. In exchange, the railroads would give Standard Oil rates much lower than competitors paid. Much lower. Sometimes half the rate. The railroads agreed. They wanted the guaranteed volume. This let Rockefeller undercut competitors on price. Other refineries paid $2 to ship a barrel of oil. Rockefeller paid $1. He could sell kerosene for less and still make higher profits. But the railroad deals were even more devious. Rockefeller negotiated rebates. The railroads would charge him the standard rate publicly. Then they would secretly refund part of the cost. So Rockefeller appeared to pay the same as everyone else. But he was actually paying far less. Competitors had no idea why they could not match his prices. Some railroad deals included another clause. The railroads would pay Standard Oil a fee for every barrel that Rockefeller's competitors shipped. Read that again. Rockefeller received money when his rivals used the railroads. His competitors were unknowingly paying him to compete against them. It was brilliant and completely unethical. Armed with these advantages, Rockefeller went after competitors systematically. He would sell kerosene below cost in markets where rivals operated. His larger operation could absorb temporary losses. Smaller refiners could not. They either sold their businesses to Rockefeller or went bankrupt. When competitors sold, Rockefeller usually kept their facilities running. He did not want to destroy refining capacity. He wanted to own it. The former owners often stayed on as managers. But they worked for Standard Oil now. Their profits flowed to Rockefeller. Their independence was gone. This approach was called horizontal integration. Instead of controlling the supply chain from oil well to customer, Rockefeller bought all the competitors at his level. Every refinery that could challenge him got acquired or destroyed. By 1872, Standard Oil controlled 25% of American oil refining. By 1878, that number reached 75%. By 1880, it was 85%. By 1882, Standard Oil controlled 90%. It was a monopoly, not legally at first, but functionally. Rockefeller organized his holdings as a trust, a legal structure that let him control multiple companies in different states. Standard Oil of Ohio, Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of New York. Technically, they were separate corporations. Practically, Rockefeller ran them all. The same 9 trustees controlled every company. They met regularly. They coordinated strategy. They set prices. They decided which facilities to close and which to expand. It was a monopoly disguised as separate companies. The trust made Rockefeller the richest man in America. Richer than Cornelius Vanderbilt had been, richer than Andrew Carnegie. By some estimates, at his peak in the late 1890s, Rockefeller's personal wealth reached the equivalent of over $400 billion in modern money, maybe more. The calculations are difficult because his wealth was so vast. He owned most of Standard Oil. Standard Oil controlled almost all American oil refining. Kerosene was used in millions of homes for lighting. Before electricity, it was essential. And Rockefeller controlled the supply. The wealth came from total control. When you control 90% of an industry, you set prices. Rockefeller could charge whatever he wanted for kerosene. Customers had no alternative. They paid his price or went without light. The profits were staggering. In a good year in the 1890s, Rockefeller's personal income exceeded $58 million. This was in an era when skilled workers earned about $500 annually. A steel worker might make $12 for a 72-hour work week. That is about 17 cents per hour. Barely enough to survive. A coal miner might earn $450 per year working 12-hour days, 300 days annually. That included the risk of cave-ins and explosions. Rockefeller made more in one day than a coal miner earned in an entire career. More in 1 hour than most families earned in a year. The inequality was obscene. He lived modestly despite the wealth. His home in Cleveland was large but not ostentatious, maybe 30 rooms. Comfortable but not a palace. He attended Forest Hill Baptist Church every Sunday. He sat in the same pew. He taught Sunday school to young boys. He sang hymns. He gave away 10% of his income from his very first paycheck onward. As his fortune grew, his charitable giving grew proportionally. In 1884, he donated about $120,000. By 1889, that increased to $1.5 million. By 1905, he was giving away several million annually. The University of Chicago received over $35 million from Rockefeller. It would not exist without him. He funded medical research. He built schools for African Americans in the South. He donated to Baptist churches nationwide. But his business tactics were merciless. Competitors who refused to sell faced coordinated attacks. Rockefeller would slash prices in their specific markets while keeping them high everywhere else. A refinery in Philadelphia might face kerosene prices so low they could not compete. Meanwhile, prices in Boston and New York remained high. Standard Oil could lose money in Philadelphia temporarily while making huge profits elsewhere. Independent refiners could not do that. They operated in one market. If prices there went below cost, they went bankrupt. Rockefeller would also pressure railroads to raise shipping rates for competitors. He controlled so much rail business that companies listened. A refinery that refused to sell might suddenly find shipping costs doubled. That made their kerosene more expensive. Customers bought from Standard Oil instead. Rockefeller's managers used industrial espionage. They bribed railroad clerks to provide confidential shipping records. They learned where competitors sent their kerosene, how much they shipped, what prices they charged. Armed with this information, Standard Oil could undercut them precisely. They bribed local officials. They obtained inside information about competitors' financial situations. They spread rumors. If a small refinery was struggling, Standard Oil representatives would whisper to banks that the company was near bankruptcy. Credit would be cut off. The refinery would collapse. Standard Oil would buy the assets for pennies on the dollar. Some competitors were driven to ruin, their life savings destroyed. A few took their own lives. The pressure was relentless. Rockefeller never stopped. He wanted every refinery in America, and he was willing to destroy lives to get them. His managers understood. Victory was the only acceptable outcome. Mercy was weakness. Business was war, and war had casualties. Rockefeller did not see this as immoral. He saw it as efficient. The oil industry had been chaotic. Hundreds of small refineries competing, prices fluctuating wildly, supply unstable. Standard Oil brought order. They provided consistent products at predictable prices. Yes, they destroyed competitors, but that was progress. Survival of the fittest applied to business as well as nature. By 1885, Rockefeller had achieved what seemed impossible. He controlled the entire American oil industry from refining to distribution. Standard Oil was not just dominant, it was effectively the only option. And that monopoly power generated wealth faster than any previous enterprise in American history. Rockefeller began building estates, not palaces like the Vanderbilts. He was too practical for that. He did not want attention. He wanted privacy and security. Forest Hill in Cleveland sat on 700 acres. The house was large, maybe 30 rooms, comfortable, well-built. The grounds were beautiful. Gardens, lawns, woods, riding trails. It was a retreat, a place for his family away from the chaos of business. His wife said he loved it. His children could play safely there. He also purchased land in Westchester County, New York, Pocantico Hills. Just north of New York City, beautiful rolling hills, views of the Hudson River. He bought property gradually, a few hundred acres, then more, eventually over 3,000 acres. It became his primary estate, the place where he felt safe, where his family could live without constant intrusion. He began building a house there in 1906, something substantial but not ridiculous. He hired architects. They designed a country estate, 4 stories, stone construction, about 40 rooms, comfortable for a large family and staff. But Rockefeller's son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., pushed for something grander. He was in his 30s by then. He had grown up wealthy. He thought his father's taste was too plain, too modest. The Rockefeller name deserved something impressive, something that matched their wealth. The original architects were dismissed. New architects were hired, William Delano and Chester Aldrich. They redesigned the house completely. The new Kykewit was substantial, 40 rooms, 4 stories, built of stone and concrete. Designed to last centuries, classical architecture, understated elegance, no Vanderbilt excess, but definitely a mansion. Construction took years. The house was completed in 1913. In the 1890s, something changed. Journalists began investigating Standard Oil. Not local reporters looking for easy stories. Serious investigative journalists with resources and determination. They wanted to know how one company controlled an entire industry. They wanted to understand how one man became so wealthy. What they found horrified them. The secret railroad deals, the rebates and kickbacks, the predatory pricing, the industrial espionage, the destruction of competitors, the bribery and corruption, all of it documented, all of it published. The public began to understand what Rockefeller had built, and they were not impressed. The most devastating investigation came from Ida Tarbell. Her background gave her motivation. Her father, Franklin Tarbell, had been an independent oil producer in Pennsylvania, a small operator, an honest businessman trying to compete fairly. He built a small refinery. He worked hard. He had some success. Then Standard Oil arrived. They offered to buy his refinery. He refused. He believed in independence, in competition, in building something for his family. Standard Oil began undercutting his prices. They sold kerosene below cost in his markets. He could not match their prices. His customers left. His business collapsed. He lost everything. The refinery was sold to pay debts. Franklin Tarbell was broken, financially, emotionally, spiritually. Young Ida watched her father destroyed by Rockefeller's tactics. She was a teenager. She saw her family's comfortable life disappear. She saw her father's spirit crushed. She never forgot. She became a teacher, then a writer, then a journalist. She was talented, smart, determined. And when McClure's magazine asked her to investigate Standard Oil in 1902, she accepted immediately. This was personal. This was revenge. She spent years researching. She interviewed former Standard Oil employees, men who had quit in disgust, men who knew the tactics. She obtained confidential company documents, ledgers showing the secret railroad rebates, contracts revealing the predatory deals, internal memos discussing how to crush competitors. She traced the corporation's history from its founding in 1870 through its rise to total monopoly power. She documented every acquisition, every bankruptcy, every life destroyed. She found competitors who had lost everything. She interviewed their families. She gathered their stories. She built an overwhelming case. What she revealed shocked America. Rockefeller had not built Standard Oil through superior products or better service. He had used ruthless and often illegal tactics. The secret railroad rebates that gave him unfair advantages, the deliberate bankrupting of competitors through below-cost pricing, the systematic crushing of anyone who challenged his control, the lies and manipulation, the bribery of officials, the espionage, the threats. Tarbell wrote with precision. She did not need sensationalism. The facts were damning enough. She showed how Rockefeller's monopoly raised prices for consumers while destroying small businesses, how the trust concentrated wealth in one man's hands while creating poverty for thousands of workers, how Standard Oil operated like a criminal organization with legal protection. Her series, The History of the Standard Oil Company, ran from 1902 to 1904 in McClure's magazine. 19 installments, each one more damning than the last. She included documents. She named names. She provided details that could be verified. It was not speculation. It was investigative journalism at its finest. The series was published as a book in 1904. It became an immediate bestseller. People across America read it. They learned how Standard Oil really operated. They discovered what Rockefeller had done to achieve his wealth. Suddenly, Rockefeller was not a captain of industry. He was a robber baron, a thief, a man who built his fortune on the corpses of honest businesses. His wealth was not admirable achievement. It was theft on a massive scale, plunder disguised as business. The public turned against him, violently. Churches that once praised his donations now returned his money. They did not want blood money. Universities hesitated to accept his gifts. Some refused outright. They did not want to be associated with him. Rockefeller tried defending himself. He gave rare interviews. He pointed to his charitable giving. He had donated tens of millions of dollars. He built the University of Chicago. He funded medical research. He built schools. He supported churches. Did his philanthropy not count for something? Did the good he did not balance the bad? The answer for most Americans was no, absolutely not. As critics pointed out, Rockefeller was giving away with one hand what he had stolen with the other, building universities with money extracted from crushed competitors and exploited workers. Blood money remained blood money even when donated to churches and universities. The stain could not be washed away with charity. Other journalists followed Tarbell's example. Lincoln Steffens exposed political corruption in The Shame of the Cities. He showed how wealthy businessmen bribed politicians, how city governments were controlled by corporate interests. Upton Sinclair investigated meatpacking plants in The Jungle. He revealed horrific conditions, spoiled meats sold to consumers, workers losing fingers in machinery, rats falling into sausage grinders. The public was horrified. Ray Stannard Baker investigated labor conditions, child workers in textile mills, 12-hour days for children as young as 8, dangerous machinery, no safety protections. The whole structure of Gilded Age wealth came under scrutiny, and every investigation reached the same conclusion. The fortunes were built on exploitation. The mansions were paid for with stolen wages. The system was designed to transfer wealth upward and keep it there. Workers created the value. Owners extracted it. The inequality was not accidental. It was intentional. Public opinion shifted dramatically. In 1880, most Americans admired wealthy industrialists. They were seen as nation builders, job creators, visionaries who made America strong, self-made men who embodied American opportunity. By 1905, many viewed them as predators. Thieves who got rich by destroying honest competition and exploiting workers. The government began taking action. In 1890, Congress had passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. It outlawed monopolies and attempts to restrain trade. The law stated that any combination in restraint of trade was illegal, but enforcement was weak for years. Companies found loopholes. They reorganized as trusts or holding companies. They claimed they were not monopolies. They were just successful businesses. Courts often sided with corporations. The law seemed toothless. Then Theodore Roosevelt became president in 1901. Roosevelt believed in capitalism. He was not a socialist. But he also believed in regulation, in fairness, in competition. Monopolies that grew too powerful threatened the entire system. They needed to be controlled or broken up. In 1906, Roosevelt's Justice Department filed suit against Standard Oil. The charge was violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Standard Oil had created an illegal monopoly. The company had systematically destroyed competition. It had restrained trade. It must be dissolved. The case was assigned to federal court. Standard Oil's lawyers were excellent, the best money could buy. They argued the company had grown large through efficiency and superior management. That size was not illegal. That Standard Oil provided better service and lower prices than competitors could. That breaking up the company would harm the economy, would raise prices for consumers, would destroy jobs. The government countered with evidence, mountains of evidence, secret railroad deals, documents showing predatory pricing strategies, internal memos discussing how to crush competitors, testimony from former employees, testimony from destroyed competitors, records proving Standard Oil had deliberately created a monopoly. The case dragged through courts for years. Standard Oil appealed every decision. They used every legal tactic to delay. But the evidence was overwhelming. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly. The trust violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. The company must be dissolved. The court ordered Standard Oil broken into 34 separate corporations. Each would operate independently. They could not coordinate, could not fix prices, could not collude. But here was the bitter irony. The breakup made Rockefeller even wealthier. He owned about 25% of Standard Oil's stock. When the company was divided, he received shares in all 34 new companies: Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of New York, Standard Oil of California, 34 separate corporations. And those companies, now competing separately, became more valuable. Their stock prices rose. Investors bought shares. The companies thrived. Rockefeller's net worth actually increased after losing the antitrust case. The man who built an illegal monopoly profited from its destruction. By some estimates, his wealth increased by over $50 million in the year following the breakup. The public fury was not limited to legal action. Workers hated Rockefeller with intensity that shocked even other industrialists. Standard Oil employed thousands. The company paid low wages, very low, Refinery workers might earn $10 to $15 per week, working 60 to 72 hours. That was barely enough to survive. Working conditions were dangerous. Refineries exploded regularly. Oil was flammable. One spark could trigger a massive fire. Workers burned to death. Others were permanently scarred. Chemical exposure caused health problems. Injuries were common. There was no workers' compensation, no health insurance, no safety regulations. If you got hurt, you were fired. If you died, your family got nothing. The company paid nothing. The contrast between worker poverty and Rockefeller wealth was obscene. Men earning $12 per week watched their employer accumulate $58 million per year. The inequality created rage, burning resentment. Some workers quit, but most could not. They had families, bills, no alternatives. They stayed and seethed. Rockefeller also owned coal mines in Colorado through a subsidiary called Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. The mines were brutal, deep underground, poorly ventilated. Always at risk of collapse or explosion, cave-ins killed miners regularly. Explosions could kill dozens at once. Miners worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days per week. They were paid by the ton of coal extracted. This created incentive to take risks, to ignore safety, to work faster even when exhausted. The company owned the housing where miners lived. Company towns with company stores. Miners had to rent from the company, had to buy from the company store. They had no choice. Prices were high, rent was high. By the time rent and supplies were deducted from wages, miners often owed money to the company. They were trapped in debt, unable to leave, unable to save. It was close to slavery. In September 1913, the Colorado miners went on strike. They had organized, joined the United Mine Workers Union. They demanded better wages, an 8-hour workday, the right to shop at stores not owned by the company, the right to live in housing not owned by the company, the right to choose where they spent their money. Basic human dignity. Colorado Fuel and Iron refused to negotiate. The company would not recognize the union, would not discuss terms. The response was simple. Striking workers were fired, evicted. Colorado Fuel and Iron owned the houses. They ordered striking families out immediately. Thousands of miners and their families were forced out. Women, children, elderly parents, everyone. They had nowhere to go. The miners set up tent camps nearby. One of the largest camps was at Ludlow, a flat area near the mines. Hundreds of tents were erected. Canvas shelters housing over 1,000 people, men, women, children. They lived through the Colorado winter in canvas tents. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow fell. Winds howled. Families huddled around small fires trying to stay warm. The strike continued into 1914. Months passed. Tensions escalated. The company hired guards. The Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. Armed men brought in to protect company property and intimidate strikers. They patrolled around the camps. They carried rifles. They harassed strikers. Occasionally, they fired shots into the camps at night, terrorizing families. The Colorado National Guard was called in by the governor, supposedly to keep peace, to prevent violence. But the guards sided with the company. Many guardsmen were company employees in uniform. They received pay from Colorado Fuel and Iron while serving in the National Guard. April 20th, 1914. Morning at Ludlow Camp. A beautiful spring day. Families were going about their routines. Women cooked breakfast, children played, men discussed strategy. The strike had lasted months. Resources were running low, but they were determined. Then gunfire. Guardsmen and company guards surrounded the tent colony. What happened next is disputed. The company claimed strikers fired first, that guardsmen responded in self-defense. Survivors said the guard attacked without warning, that machine guns opened fire on sleeping families. What is not disputed is what followed. Machine gun fire raked the tents. Families scrambled for cover. They hid in pits dug beneath the canvas for protection, small cellars where they had stored food. Now they became bomb shelters. The battle lasted all day. Rifles cracked, machine guns chattered. Screams filled the air. Children cried. Women prayed. Men tried to fight back with hunting rifles. It was hopeless. The Guard had military weapons, training, organization. As evening fell, the Guardsmen moved in. They set the tents on fire. Kerosene was poured on canvas. Matches were struck. Flames erupted. Families fled. Some were shot as they ran. Guardsmen fired at fleeing women and children. When the fires burned out the next day, investigators arrived. They found bodies. In one pit beneath a burned tent, they found 11 children and 2 women, suffocated by smoke, burned, dead. The children ranged in age from 3 months to 11 years. Their bodies were charred, unrecognizable. The final count was 25 dead. 19 of them were women and children. Only 6 were adult male strikers. It became known as the Ludlow Massacre. The nation exploded in outrage. This was not a labor dispute. This was murder. Company guards and state militia had machine-gunned families, had burned children alive, had shot fleeing women, and the company responsible was owned by John D. Rockefeller. He was not in Colorado, he was in New York, at his estate, living in comfort. He claimed he knew nothing about conditions at the mines. He said managers handled operations. He did not involve himself in daily decisions. He was not responsible for what they did. Nobody believed him. The mines were his. The company was his. The guards were paid with his money. The policies that led to Ludlow came from the top, from men Rockefeller appointed, men who reported to him. The deaths were his responsibility. Protesters surrounded Rockefeller properties. In Cleveland, crowds gathered outside Forest Hill. Police were called to keep order. Guards were posted around the perimeter, 24 hours per day. Armed men patrolling the estate. In New York, Kaikit was still under construction. Security was increased immediately. More guards hired. The gates were locked. No one entered without authorization. The mansion at 4 West 54th Street in Manhattan became a target. Protesters marched outside. They carried signs, "Murderer," "Baby killer," "Blood on your hands." Police formed barriers to keep them back. That is when the anarchists struck. They had been planning for weeks, 3 men. Arthur Caron was the leader. He was 24 years old. A true believer in violent revolution. He thought wealthy capitalists had to be killed. That only violence would change the system. He and 2 accomplices built a bomb. Dynamite stolen from a construction site. Wrapped in newspaper, packed in a suitcase. They set a timer, crude but effective. On May 15, 1914, Caron carried the suitcase to 4 West 54th Street. Early morning, few people on the street. He placed it on the front steps of the Rockefeller mansion. Then, he tried to leave. The bomb went off early. The explosion was massive. Caron was killed instantly, torn apart by his own bomb. A second man nearby, possibly an accomplice, was hit by shrapnel. He bled out on the sidewalk before help arrived. The mansion took damage. The limestone facade cracked. Windows shattered across 3 floors. The front door was blown inward. Smoke poured into the street. Neighbors ran outside. Police arrived within minutes. They found blood on the pavement, body parts, debris everywhere. This was the explosion that opened this story, the attack that changed everything for the Rockefeller family. But it was not the only attempt. Anarchists sent threatening letters to Rockefeller, dozens of them. They promised more attacks. They said he would pay for Ludlow, that his blood would answer for the blood of the children, that they would kill him and his family. The threats were credible. Caron had proved that. The Rockefeller family evacuated to Kaikit. The estate in Westchester County was more defensible. The property covered thousands of acres. Guards could patrol the perimeter. Watch for intruders. The main house sat on a hilltop with clear views in all directions. Approaching without being seen was nearly impossible. Kaiket became a fortress. The estate perimeter had walls 9 feet tall in sections, stone construction, topped with broken glass embedded in concrete, jagged shards pointing skyward. Anyone trying to climb over would be shredded. Guard towers were built at key points, armed men watching. The main gates were solid steel. Guards were posted 24 hours per day, checking everyone who entered. No one got in without authorization. The house itself had minimal ground floor windows on certain exposures. Interior spaces could be secured room by room. Heavy doors, locks, defensible positions. This was not paranoia. This was necessity. Rockefeller faced real threats from people who wanted him dead. The hatred was not limited to anarchists and striking workers. Middle-class Americans who had never held a picket sign despised Rockefeller. They read Ida Tarbell's exposés in McClure's magazine. They learned how Standard Oil crushed competition. They read about the secret railroad deals, the destroyed competitors, the monopoly tactics. They saw photographs from Ludlow, the burned tents, the dead children laid out in rows, tiny bodies wrapped in blankets. They read accounts from survivors, mothers describing how they hid in pits while bullets tore through the canvas above, how they held their children and prayed. They concluded that Rockefeller was evil, that his wealth came from suffering, that he represented everything wrong with American capitalism: greed, exploitation, indifference to human life. Churches that once praised his donations now returned his money. Baptist congregations that had received thousands refused further gifts. They did not want blood money. Money stained with the blood of children. Universities hesitated to accept his gifts. Some refused outright. Professors resigned rather than teach at institutions funded by Rockefeller. Students protested. They did not want to attend a university built on exploitation. His name became toxic. Mention Rockefeller and people thought of burned children and illegal monopolies, of crushed competitors and machine-gunned miners. The man who once embodied American success now symbolized American greed. Rockefeller's response was silence at first. He believed the attacks would fade, that people would forget, that other news would replace Ludlow in the public consciousness. He continued his routine: church on Sunday, quiet family life at Kaiket, charitable giving. He thought his philanthropy spoke for itself. The universities he built, the medical research he funded, the schools for African Americans. Surely people would remember the good he did. He was wrong. The fury intensified. More protests, more threats, more calls for his arrest. Some wanted him tried for murder over Ludlow. Others wanted him imprisoned for antitrust violations. The monopoly was illegal. Why was he free? A few wanted him dead. Revenge for the children, an eye for an eye. Rockefeller realized he could not wait this out. He needed help, professional help. In late 1914, Rockefeller hired Ivy Lee. Lee was a public relations consultant, a new profession. Most people had never heard of it. Lee had worked for Pennsylvania Railroad. He understood crisis management, image rehabilitation. He understood something that Rockefeller did not. Public opinion mattered. You could not ignore it. You had to manage it, shape it, control the narrative. Lee developed a strategy. First, Rockefeller needed to seem human. The public saw him as a monster, a greedy industrialist who counted money while children burned. That image had to change. Lee arranged for photographers to follow Rockefeller, carefully staged situations. They captured him playing golf, smiling, looking grandfatherly, attending church, singing hymns, reading his Bible, giving dimes to children. The dimes became iconic. Rockefeller would hand out shiny new dimes to children he met. on the street, at church, anywhere photographers could capture it. Reporters wrote stories about his generosity. Look at this kind old man giving money to children. It was absurd. The richest man in history giving 10-cent coins to children. But it worked. The image softened. Gradually, people began seeing him differently. Not as a robber baron, as an elderly man, a grandfather figure, someone who loved children, who wanted to help. The dimes became symbolic. Rockefeller carried rolls of them. He handed them out constantly. Thousands of children received Rockefeller dimes. They treasured them, showed their parents. The story spread. That nice old man who gives dimes to children, it created cognitive dissonance. How could someone so generous be evil? Second, Lee emphasized philanthropy. Rockefeller had been donating for decades, but quietly, privately. Lee made it public, very public. Press releases about university donations, announcements of medical research funding, stories about libraries being built in small towns across America. The Rockefeller Foundation, created in 1913 with an endowment of $100 million. The message was clear. Rockefeller was giving his fortune away, not spending it on yachts or palaces, giving it away to help humanity, to cure diseases, to educate children, to improve lives. Lee also advised Rockefeller Jr. to become the public face of the family. Jr. had never worked at Standard Oil. He was not connected to the monopoly. He had nothing to do with Ludlow. He was clean. His hands were not bloody. Jr. began appearing at public events, giving speeches, announcing charitable projects, dedicating buildings. He spoke well. He looked respectable. He represented a new generation, one that cared about workers and fairness. The strategy worked. Slowly, very slowly, public opinion shifted. Not completely. Plenty of people still hated the Rockefeller name, still remembered Ludlow, still saw the family as thieves and murderers. But the rage diminished. The death threats decreased. The protests became smaller, less frequent. Kikuit remained heavily guarded, but the family could move more freely, could venture out without fearing assassination. Time helped. World War I broke out in 1914. American attention turned to Europe, to the war. Ludlow faded from front pages. Other tragedies replaced it. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915. American entry into the war in 1917. Millions dead in European trenches. Ludlow seemed smaller, further away, less immediate. The estate survived through this period because Rockefeller had resources his critics did not. Money for security, money for the best lawyers, money to wait out the fury. Other Gilded Age families crumbled under similar pressure. The Vanderbilts could not sustain their mansions. Too expensive. Too many of them. The Breakers in Newport, Marble House, Biltmore in North Carolina. The families sold them or donated them to preservation societies. The Whitney houses disappeared, demolished for development. The Astor properties were sold, converted to apartments or offices, but Rockefeller properties endured. Forest Hill remained a private estate until Rockefeller's death in 1937. Kikuit stayed in family hands for generations. The mansion at 4 West 54th Street was eventually donated to the Museum of Modern Art. But that came decades later. Rockefeller lived to age 97. He died on May 23, 1937 at the Casements, his winter home in Ormond Beach, Florida. He outlived his enemies. The journalists who exposed him. Ida Tarbell died in 1944. Lincoln Steffens died in 1936. The anarchists who bombed his properties were dead or imprisoned. The workers who hated him were dead. Most of the miners from Ludlow were dead. The children who survived carried the trauma, but time dulled even that. He outlived them all. And in outliving them, Rockefeller won a different kind of victory. He gave away roughly $540 million during his lifetime. In modern terms, adjusted for inflation, that is tens of billions. Maybe over 100 billion, depending on how you calculate. He funded the University of Chicago. Without him, it would not exist. He gave over $80 million. He created the Rockefeller Foundation, which pioneered medical research. The foundation funded research that led to the yellow fever vaccine, to treatments for hookworm which plagued the American South, to public health improvements worldwide. He built the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which became Rockefeller University. It remains one of the world's leading biomedical research institutions. He funded education for African Americans in the South, Spelman College, Tuskegee Institute, schools that provided opportunities where none existed. He built libraries, churches, schools across America, and gradually the public narrative changed. Rockefeller, the robber baron, became Rockefeller, the philanthropist. The man who built an illegal monopoly became the man who gave his fortune away. It was calculated. It was deliberate. It was managed by Ivy Lee and others, but it worked. By the time he died, newspaper obituaries praised his charitable legacy. They mentioned Standard Oil almost as a footnote, a detail from his business career. The focus was on philanthropy, on the good he did. The hatred had faded, not disappeared, but faded enough that the estates were no longer under threat. John D. Rockefeller Jr. continued the strategy. He spent his entire life managing the family image. He never profited from Standard Oil directly. The trust had been broken up before he was old enough to run it, but he inherited the wealth. His share of the 34 successor companies, hundreds of millions of dollars. He dedicated himself to redemption, to washing away the stains on the family name. Jr. built Rockefeller Center in Manhattan during the Great Depression, the largest private construction project of the era. 14 buildings, covering 22 acres in Midtown. It created thousands of jobs when unemployment exceeded 25%. Men desperate for work found employment. The project became a symbol of hope during the darkest economic times. He donated the land for United Nations headquarters in New York, bought the property, and gave it to the UN, the international body that promotes peace and cooperation among nations, a gift worth millions. He restored colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, the entire historic town. Buildings from the 1700s were falling apart. He spent millions preserving them, making them into a living museum. He funded churches, museums, parks across America. Everywhere you looked, Rockefeller money was building something beneficial. The estates reflected this transformation. Kikwit was no longer just a fortress. It became a showcase for modern art. Jr. collected extensively: Picasso, Matisse, Calder. He filled Kikwit with masterpieces. The house became a gallery, a place where beauty lived alongside security. After Jr.'s death in 1960, the estate passed to his son Nelson. Nelson Rockefeller served as governor of New York from 1959 to 1973. He was vice president of the United States under Gerald Ford from 1974 to 1977. He continued adding to the art collection: sculptures in the gardens, paintings in the galleries. When Nelson died in 1979, the family faced a decision: keep Kikwit private or open it to the public. They chose public. The family donated Kikwit to the National Trust for Historic Preservation in 1991. In 1994, it opened to the public as a museum. Visitors can tour the house, see the art, walk the gardens, designed by William Wells Bosworth. The property that was once surrounded by angry protesters is now a destination for art lovers and history enthusiasts. Forest Hill was demolished after Rockefeller's death. The Cleveland estate, where he first retreated from public fury. The land was developed. Houses were built. The mansion was torn down. Nothing remains. But the casements in Florida was preserved. the winter home where Rockefeller spent his final years, where he died. It is now a cultural center, open to the public, used for weddings and community events, art exhibitions, concerts. The mansion where the most hated man in America died is now a place of joy and culture. The estates survived in different forms, some as private properties, some as museums, some repurposed entirely, but they survived, which was more than most Gilded Age mansions achieved. The Vanderbilt cottages in Newport were sold to preservation societies. They operate as museums. The Carnegie Mansion in New York became the Cooper Hewitt Museum. The Frick House became the Frick Collection, one of New York's great art museums. The pattern repeated across America. Private fortunes became public institutions. What robber barons built in greed, the public inherited in culture. The Rockefeller transformation was the most complete. From hated monopolist to beloved philanthropist, from robber baron to national benefactor, from murderer of children to savior of children through medical research and education. It took calculated effort, decades of public relations, billions in charitable giving, strategic planning by Ivy Lee and his successors, but it succeeded. The name that once meant greed now meant generosity. The estates that once symbolized exploitation now represented preservation and access. The mansions built with Standard Oil profits became showcases for art and culture available to everyone who could afford admission. But the question remains, can blood money be washed clean? Rockefeller made his fortune through ruthless tactics that destroyed lives. His monopoly raised prices for millions. Consumers paid more for kerosene because he controlled supply. His monopoly crushed hundreds of honest businesses, men who worked hard, who played fair, who lost everything when Standard Oil targeted them. His coal mines worked men to death, 12-hour days underground, terrible conditions, poverty wages. His guards machine-gunned striking families at Ludlow. 11 children burned to death, women shot fleeing. No amount of charitable giving erases those facts. The universities he funded are real. The University of Chicago educates thousands. Rockefeller University makes medical breakthroughs. The medical research he supported saved lives. Millions of lives. The yellow fever vaccine, public health improvements. Those are real benefits. But the suffering that created the money was also real. The workers who died in his refineries. The families burned at Ludlow. The competitors driven to bankruptcy and suicide. They cannot be brought back. Their suffering cannot be undone. The money Rockefeller gave away came from them, from their labor, from their destroyed dreams. Is that redemption or just redistribution of stolen goods? The estates survived because Rockefeller understood power better than his critics. He understood that economic power could be transformed into social power, that monopoly profits could buy cultural legitimacy. That sustained charitable giving could rewrite history, and he understood that time could soften memory. The generation that experienced Standard Oil's predatory practices died. Their children and grandchildren learned about Rockefeller philanthropy in schools, often in schools funded by Rockefeller money. The narrative was rewritten, not erased, but rewritten with emphasis on redemption rather than exploitation. The Ludlow Massacre faded from public consciousness. It is taught in some history courses. Labor historians know it, but most Americans do not. Ask people about Rockefeller and they think of philanthropy, of universities and medical research, not of burned children in Colorado, not of crushed competitors in Ohio. The estates reinforced that narrative. Beautiful properties open to the public, art collections everyone can enjoy, gardens where families picnic on summer afternoons. The hatred that once surrounded these places is forgotten, deliberately forgotten, managed out of existence through calculated image rehabilitation. What remains is appreciation for preservation and access, gratitude that Kaikouet was saved, that its art collection is available, that the gardens are maintained. The violence that funded it is not discussed on tours. The monopoly that paid for it is mentioned briefly, if at all. The narrative has been controlled, managed, shaped into something acceptable, something that does not make visitors uncomfortable. In that sense, the estates did outlive America's hatred, not because the hatred was unjustified. It was completely justified. Every bit of rage was earned. But because hatred requires memory, and memory fades, generations pass, new issues arise, old grievances lose urgency. The Rockefeller family understood this. They waited. They donated. They stayed quiet during controversies and generous during recoveries. They hired the best public relations experts. They planted stories in newspapers. They controlled their image obsessively. They let time do what no amount of money could buy quickly. They let people forget. And people did forget. Not everyone. Not completely, but enough. Kaikouet stands today on its hilltop in Westchester County. The views are spectacular. Rolling hills, forests, the Hudson River in the distance. The house is immaculate. The gardens are perfectly maintained. The art collection is world-class. Visitors pay admission to tour the property. They see Picasso sculptures in the gardens, Calder mobiles, Matisse paintings in the galleries. They photograph the landscapes. They enjoy the beauty. Very few think about the coal miners in Colorado, or the bombers who targeted this place, or the machine guns that protected the perimeter, or the broken glass on the walls meant to shred intruders. Those stories are not part of the tour. They are not displayed in the rooms. They are not mentioned in the guidebooks. The narrative has been controlled, managed, shaped into something acceptable, beautiful, educational. The fortress became a museum. The robber baron became a philanthropist. And the estates that once symbolized everything wrong with American capitalism now represent culture, preservation, and public access. It is a remarkable reversal, one that required a century to achieve, one that required billions in strategic giving, one that required the death of everyone who remembered how it really was. But it worked. The Rockefeller estates survived. They thrived. They transformed. And in surviving, they completed the family's greatest trick. They made America forget why it hated them in the first place. The transformation was not accidental. It was engineered. Every detail was calculated. When Junior took over management of the family fortune after his father's death, he inherited $400 million, more wealth than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He also inherited a name associated with greed and murder. He spent the rest of his life trying to change that association. The estates were tools in that process, physical spaces that could tell new stories, that could create new memories, that could replace old narratives with carefully constructed new ones. Kaikouet underwent transformation in the 1930s. Junior hired landscape architect William Wells Bosworth to redesign the grounds. Bosworth had worked on European estates. He understood classical design, formal gardens, terraces, fountains. He spent years at Kaikouet creating gardens that rivaled European palaces. The lower terrace featured Italian gardens, stone balustrades, statues imported from Europe. The inner garden had a fountain at the center. Flower beds in geometric patterns. Everything perfectly maintained. The gardens became the focus, not the fortress walls, not the security, the beauty. Junior also began collecting modern art. This was strategic. Old money collected old masters, Rembrandt, Vermeer, paintings that demonstrated wealth and taste, but those were associated with robber barons, with the Gilded Age. Junior wanted something different, something that suggested forward thinking, cultural sophistication, modern sensibility. He bought Picasso, Matisse, Calder, artists who represented the 20th century, progress, innovation. The art collection at Kaikui became world-class, museum quality. Curators came to study it. Art historians wrote about it. The house that had been a fortress became known as an art gallery. The strategy extended beyond Kaikui. Junior's philanthropic projects were chosen carefully, not just for social good, but for image impact. Rockefeller Center was built during the Great Depression. Thousands of unemployed men got jobs. The project became a symbol of hope, of private enterprise helping in crisis, of Rockefeller caring about workers. The irony was thick. The family that had machine-gunned striking workers now employed thousands, paid them fair wages, provided safe conditions. The contrast was intentional. This is the new Rockefeller way. The old way is gone. The United Nations land donation served multiple purposes. It was genuinely valuable. The UN needed a headquarters. New York wanted it. Junior provided the location. But it also positioned the family as internationally minded, peace-loving, supporters of cooperation among nations. The opposite of ruthless monopolists who crushed competition. Colonial Williamsburg restoration showed appreciation for American history, for preservation, for education. The Rockefellers cared about heritage, about maintaining the past for future generations. Each project told a story. Each story contradicted the old narrative. The family also funded universities beyond the University of Chicago. Spelman College for African American women, founded in 1881 but supported heavily by Rockefeller money. This showed racial progressivism. At a time when segregation was legal, when Jim Crow laws dominated the South, the Rockefellers supported education for Black Americans. It was genuine, but it was also strategic. It countered the image of exploitative capitalists. Rockefeller University focused on medical research, finding cures, helping humanity. The Rockefeller Foundation worked globally, public health initiatives in dozens of countries, eradicating diseases, improving sanitation, saving lives. Every donation was publicized, press releases, newspaper articles, announcements. The public learned constantly about Rockefeller generosity, about the good they were doing. The contrast with Standard Oil tactics was stark. That was intentional. Create such a gap between past and present that the past becomes irrelevant. Make the good so visible that the bad becomes invisible. Ivy Lee understood this perfectly. He trained Junior in public relations, how to speak, how to present projects, how to control narratives. Junior became skilled at it, very skilled. He gave interviews carefully. He chose his words precisely. He never defended Standard Oil. He acknowledged it was a different era, different standards. His father had operated in his time. Junior operated in his. The future mattered more than the past. This became the family mantra. Look forward, not back. The estates embodied this. Forest Hill was demolished. The Cleveland estate was removed. Why? Because it represented the old era, the Standard Oil days, the monopoly. Better to erase it, to build new things. Kaikui remained because it could be transformed, because it represented the new Rockefellers, art collectors, philanthropists, public servants. The casement survived because it was associated with Rockefeller's final peaceful years, not with Standard Oil, not with Ludlow, with an old man living quietly in Florida. Nelson Rockefeller took the transformation even further. He entered politics, became governor of New York. Republicans nominated him for president multiple times. He never won the nomination, but he was a serious candidate. Vice president under Gerald Ford. This was unthinkable for the grandson of the most hated man in America, but by the 1970s it was possible. The name had been rehabilitated enough that voters accepted a Rockefeller in high office. Nelson used the Kaikui collection strategically. He hosted political events there. Foreign dignitaries visited. They toured the art. They walked the gardens. They saw culture and sophistication, not monopoly money. When Nelson died in 1979, the family's fourth generation faced questions. What to do with Kaikiwit? It cost millions to maintain. The art collection alone required security and climate control. The gardens needed full-time staff. Property taxes were substantial. Some family members wanted to sell, to take the money and invest it elsewhere. But others understood the symbolic value. Kaikiwit represented the family transformation. Selling it would undo decades of image work. The decision was made to donate it, give it to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This accomplished several things. First, it removed the financial burden. The National Trust would handle maintenance costs. Second, it generated massive goodwill. Look at the generous Rockefellers giving away a mansion worth tens of millions. Third, it ensured preservation. The estate would not be demolished or divided. It would remain intact for future generations. Fourth, it continued the narrative. The Rockefellers as benefactors, as people who cared about culture and history. The donation was announced in 1991. The public reaction was positive. Newspapers praised the family. Kaikiwit opened to the public in 1994. Tours were limited, small groups, advance reservations required. This maintained exclusivity while providing access. The tour route was designed carefully. Start in the gardens. Let visitors see beauty first. Walk through Italianate terraces, past fountains and sculptures. Prepare them to be impressed. Then enter the house. First floor galleries, art everywhere. Picasso, Matisse, Asian ceramics, everything museum quality. Guides talk about the collection, about the architecture, about the Rockefeller commitment to preserving beauty. They mention Standard Oil briefly. John D. Rockefeller founded it, made his fortune, very successful. Then they move on to philanthropy, to the University of Chicago, to medical research. The emphasis is clear. The monopoly was business. The estates are culture. Second floor is restricted on most tours. Those were the private family quarters, bedrooms, private spaces. But even there, the narrative is controlled. This is where Nelson lived, where he entertained world leaders, where he discussed policy. The focus is on public service, on the family's contributions to society. Ludlow is never mentioned on tours. Neither is the bombing of 1914. The machine guns are gone. The broken glass was removed from the walls decades ago. The security measures are invisible. What remains is beauty and culture. The transformation required time. In 1914, the year of Ludlow and the bombing, opening Kaikiwit to the public would have been impossible. Protesters would have destroyed it. In 1994, 80 years later, people paid admission to visit. They bought tickets gladly. They toured with appreciation. They left with positive impressions of the Rockefeller family. 80 years of strategic giving, of carefully managed public relations, of patient waiting for memory to fade. It worked completely. The Casements in Florida tells a similar story. After Rockefeller's death in 1937, the estate passed through several owners. It fell into disrepair. By the 1960s, it was deteriorating. The city of Ormond Beach purchased it in 1973. They restored it, turned it into a cultural center. The mansion now hosts concerts, art exhibitions, weddings, community events. A plaque mentions that John D. Rockefeller lived and died there. But the focus is on the building, the architecture, the cultural programming, not the man who owned it. This is the pattern everywhere. The Rockefeller name appears on buildings across America. Rockefeller Center, Rockefeller University, Rockefeller Foundation. But the context is always positive, always philanthropic, never exploitative. The narrative has been completely rewritten. The estates are physical manifestations of that rewriting. They stand as proof that the transformation was real, that the family changed, that the money was put to good use, or at least made to look that way. But underneath the beauty and culture, questions remain. The art at Kaikit is genuine. Picasso painted those works. Matisse created those pieces. They have aesthetic value regardless of who owns them, but they were purchased with Standard Oil money, with monopoly profits extracted from millions of consumers, with wages stolen from workers. Does that matter? Should it matter? If a painting is beautiful, does its purchase price make it less so? If a garden brings joy to visitors, does the source of funding taint that joy? These are philosophical questions without easy answers. But they are important questions because they apply beyond the Rockefellers to every wealthy family, every robber baron, every fortune built on exploitation. Can charitable giving redeem ill-gotten gains? Can universities and hospitals built with stolen money be celebrated without acknowledging the theft? The Rockefeller estates force us to confront these questions. They do not provide answers. They simply exist as monuments to successful transformation. The estates survived America's hatred because the family understood power dynamics better than their critics. They had resources that workers and competitors did not. Money for security, for lawyers, for public relations, for waiting. They had time, generational time. While individual workers aged and died, the Rockefeller fortune continued. It could plan in decades, could execute strategies that required 30 or 40 years. Individual humans cannot think that way, but institutions and wealthy families can. This gave the Rockefellers an insurmountable advantage. They also understood that public memory is short. Events that seem monumental fade quickly. In 1914, Ludlow dominated headlines. By 1920, it was old news. By 1930, it was historical. By 1950, it was forgotten by most. By 1994, when Kaikit opened, virtually no visitors remembered it. They had learned about Rockefeller from textbooks that emphasized philanthropy, from museums funded by Rockefeller money, from universities where Rockefeller professorships shaped curricula. The family had not just changed the narrative, they had changed who told the narrative. And that made all the difference. Today, the Rockefeller estates serve their purpose perfectly. They generate positive associations, beauty, culture, art, generosity. They erase or minimize negative associations. Monopoly, exploitation, murder, greed. Visitors come away impressed. They tell friends about the beautiful gardens, the amazing art collection, the generous family that donated it all. The strategy that Ivy Lee started in 1914 has succeeded completely. 110 years later, the transformation is total. The estates did not just survive America's hatred, they outlived it, outlasted it, transformed it into appreciation. The Rockefeller story proves several things. That extreme wealth can buy anything given enough time. That narratives can be completely rewritten through sustained effort. That charitable giving can obscure the source of funds. That beautiful buildings can make people forget ugly histories. That public memory is malleable. That patience and strategy can overcome even the most intense hatred. These lessons apply far beyond one family. They explain how power operates, how the wealthy maintain legitimacy across generations, how institutions shape memory and control history. The estates stand as monuments to these lessons, beautiful monuments that most visitors do not understand. The irony is profound. The places built with monopoly money now educate people about art and culture. The houses that sheltered the most hated man in America now welcome the public. The gardens that were protected by machine guns now host wedding photos. The transformation is complete. The Rockefeller estates survived. And in surviving, they proved that with enough money, enough time, and enough strategic effort, even the bloodiest fortunes can be washed clean. The stains can be scrubbed away, the memory erased, the narrative rewritten, until beautiful gardens are just beautiful gardens, and nobody remembers the children who burned at Ludlow,